Today on Doctors Unscripted, we talked to Dr. Tory Mcjunkin with Bladder Centers of America. They're a cutting-edge clinic that focuses on treating bowel and bladder incontinence. They have an incredible 90% success rate of getting people relief. One of the things that we talk about today is from everything from nutrition to who qualifies for this treatment, and even go into ways to live a healthier and better life free of inflammation. We hope you enjoy this episode. So today we're here with Dr. Tory Mcjunkin. He's the CEO of Bladder Centers of America. He's an incredible doctor, surgeon, and we're very lucky to have him on. So welcome to the show, Tory.
Thanks for having me, Justin. Yep.
So first things first, obviously if anybody looks you up, you have an incredible background and pedigree in the pain space, and that's originally where your education was. I'd love to kind of hear, how did you transition from being one of the top pain doctors in the country to now being one of the top doctors for neuromodulation, sacral neuromodulation, and working with Bladder Centers of America?
Yeah. So that's a good question. I'd say kind of a common one, and I think my path is probably unique, just like everyone's path. But I was in the pain world, and I was really involved in teaching. One of my passions there was something called spinal cord stimulation, and that's basically like a little pacemaker for pain. So I was involved in probably 15 different research studies, maybe 30 publications, all about the use of this technology for different kind of pain conditions. There was a new company that had this underlying technology, and they reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to be on our advisory board? We're trying to figure out if we're going to use this technology for pain, or for urology, or for cardiology, for managing blood pressure. So they had like this wonderful technology. And what's interesting, like you said, neuromodulation, but what's interesting is like almost everything that happens in the body is an electrical impulse. So like people understand that in your heart, like if your heart beats funny, we call that an arrhythmia, but that means the electrical beats are not lining up. That happens everywhere else in the body too. So they had this great technology. So I was on the company, the advisory board, and they chose to go into this space called sacral neuromodulation. And it's basically using this technology, a tiny bit of electrical energy to help people who had bladder problems, and it also helps bowel problems too. The company came out 4 or 5 years ago, and I started doing it. It was an X-ray guided interventional spine-based procedure, so it was like
exactly what you've been doing.
Yeah, so I've done 1 million of those. So I was like, felt super comfortable. But the results were something like that I'd never experienced before. So the patients were bringing me in flowers, and they were like, "Thank you so much." Like I've had accidents where I'm like peeing on myself, and I'm scared to go out in public, and I'm scared to interact with people, and I can't sleep through the night because I'm waking up to go to the bathroom. And now I like have my life back. And so I think for me, it was like a transformative moment where I'm like, "Holy cow! There's this new technology." I mean, I'll talk to you about how successful it is, but it's highly successful, and then there's not a ton of people that know about it, and there's a huge amount of people suffering. And so I guess for me, I'm like, I want to focus on this particular thing and really help move this along because it could help so many people.
Well, I mean, that probably has to do with why you got into medicine in the first place. So let's rewind for a moment.
Yeah.
Like, go into your history.
Yep.
I know your dad's a chiropractor.
Yes.
What was your interest in healthcare? Was it inspiration from your dad, or how did you get into this? Yeah,
so I would say absolutely it was inspiration from my dad, so he's definitely one of my heroes. But he's a chiropractor, he's a naturopathic doctor. He's the first one to ever do acupuncture in Arizona, so like he's studied in Japan. So he's, like an OG in this space. But when I was a kid, he had his own office. And I would go to his office, and then I would just see the way he interacted with people. Like, he was just so good. He could talk to any kind of person, no matter what stage in life they were at, and, give them hope. But then I saw so many people, usually it was on the way out the door when they were walking through, and they're like, thank you. And they're like, your dad helped me, and no one else could. And so just like little things like that, like just stuck in me. And I think I realized, one, I wanted to help people. And then 2, I wanted to do something in the medical field. And so that's kind of how I got my first steps into it.
So your dad was your inspiration, just seeing how he changed lives.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what drove you to say, hey, I want to change lives like he is as well.
Yes.
And that drove you to pain, because pain, I mean, that's obviously a space where you can have a huge impact on people's lives.
Yes.
But then it sounds like that same drive is partially what took you into Bladder Centers of America.
Exactly.
Which was you saw the impact. So let's talk about that impact. So how successful is this compared to other stuff?
Well, so that's what's amazing, and I think one of the things that drove me into it even further, as I researched, what are the options? Generally, this is used for a condition called overactive bladder.
Okay. What is that?
And so, it's a condition. The hallmark of it is urgency, and so it is. People have this strong desire to use the bathroom that's like almost uncomfortable, and so the hallmark is urgency. But then there are some other symptoms that kind of go along with it. Usually frequency. So they're going to the bathroom. They feel like kind of all the time, but what it is numerically is like more than 8 times in a 24-hour period.
So that anything above 8 times is considered outside of normal.
That's considered abnormal, absolutely. Oftentimes people are waking up more than once a night is considered abnormal. Okay. So we have people who are like, I get up 6 times a night or 8 times a night. And, so some of, what I've also been studying is just the effects of sleep and how important that is for people. And then the last symptom there is incontinence. So they have urgency, frequency, nighttime urination, and incontinence, and they don't have to have all of them, but some of those things. And so what it ends up doing, though, is it just like crushes your quality of life.
Wow. Yeah, like if you have to go to the bathroom all the time, it's hard to go out with friends, go to the mall.
Yes.
Stuff. And then if you're not sleeping, because you're waking up all the time, I mean, there's a huge correlation with lack of sleep and pain receptivity.
Yes.
And so I'm sure it affects everything.
It really does. And so, there's really interesting studies that say, if you don't sleep, like let's say college, you pull an all-nighter and you stay up all night, your gut bacteria after one day of doing that is the same gut bacteria of someone who, like a diabetic's gut bacteria.
Oh my goodness.
So everything changes really, really fast, but it predisposes you to all sorts of conditions. And you have a lot of babies, and I have had a lot of babies.
4. I have 4.
I have 5. So, but I think you and I both, and probably especially our wives, have, there's a time where, you're bordering on, maybe psychosis where you just like...
Don't sleep at night.
Yeah, you're not sleeping because you're taking care of this little like precious life, but it really interferes with your health, and these people are struggling with this night after night after night.
Yeah. And without the blessing of having like a new baby or anything like that, they're just suffering to suffer, right?
Yeah. There's nothing in the end. Exactly. That's right.
So these patients, like we talked about overactive bladder syndrome, going more than once a night, 8 times in a day in a 24-hour period. And so this is one of the main conditions that you're now treating with this sacral neuromodulation.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that it was like kind of mind-boggling results that you were seeing with this type of procedure compared to like the pain procedures that you'd been doing as an interventional spine doc. So what were the differences? Yeah,
so first I'm going to just mention like how common this is because that's one of the issues. This is very, very common. So it affects somewhere between 30 and 50 million Americans. And so it becomes much more common as we age.
All right.
And so once we hit about 65, it's about 1 in 3 people.
One in 3 people.
Really common.
So there's a ton of people out there that probably have this and have no idea that it's an actual condition.
Or there are people who wake up 3 times a night and they're like, I just thought that was normal. I just always have felt tired. And like the wheels kind of start falling on the off the bus when you start waking up that frequently. You start developing like high blood pressure, cardiovascular risk, increased risk of stroke, diabetes. It just goes on and on and on. So these people are really, really suffering and sometimes silently suffering. What was your question? I know I just went in a whole other direction.
I was saying, so obviously this procedure was impactful enough for you to say, I want to just focus on this. So what are those results?
Okay, so the results, so I think that is one of the most impactful things. So I think your initial, question was like, how is this different than the results for interventional kind of pain procedures?
Yeah, because it's similar technology, just applied in a different way.
Yeah. So what I would say is the results for a lot of the interventional pain techniques are like amazing also.
Yes.
So this is not like, oh, this is so much better. This is so much better than everything else that's available for this condition, overactive bladder. Yeah. But so this is what's really cool is this underlying technology has been out 25 years. It dates back to research that went back 100 years.
Wow.
So we've known that these bladder issues are nerve issues. The nerves aren't firing in synchronicity, and they're not working appropriately. And so for most people, it's either inside the bladder, the nerves get stretched or damaged, or the nerves connecting the bladder up to the spinal cord, or even all the way up to the brain. Any of those nerves can get damaged, and then it's out of alignment, basically, a chiropractor term. So what this does is it uses a little electrical energy and kind of aligns things again, where basically your bladder and your brain can talk to each other again. The results, though, so the long-term success rate is over 90%. So it's 93%.
Almost nothing has a success rate of 90% or more.
No. So that's what's, incredible is because, the first line we talk about is like, okay, you need to do some pelvic floor exercises.
Kegels, different things.
Yeah, Kegels. So generally those are not going to hurt you, and everyone should do those. Like, there's no reason not to do those. The long-term success of those is pretty low, though, especially for this nerve condition. Yeah. They're not going to hurt you. They're only going to help you. But, is this going to help you overcome the hurdle? Probably not. Then you look at medicines. And so, I came from the world of the opioid epidemic, and we talked about that beforehand. And, that's killing 100,000 Americans. Yeah. So it's like, the Vietnam War every single year.
It's incredible.
It's insane. And, it really is like a massive societal problem. On the other end of the spectrum, we have this problem of dementia that's occurring in America too. And likely it's multifactorial. So it's, processed foods, genetically modified foods, seed oils, medicines, different medicines, not addressing the root cause of issues. But the medicines that are used to treat overactive bladder, they're just not very effective at all.
Yeah.
So
I've seen that.
Yeah, so their success rate is, we call it number needed to treat, but you have to treat 8 people before one person does good. Yeah, which is like terrible. So most likely...
But all of them will get the side effects, right?
Yeah, so that's not even side effects. That's just like, do they help you or not? The side effects...
1 in 8 people. Wow.
Yeah, the nasty side effects is they increase your risk of dementia by 150%. So that means if you're on one of these medicines long term, you have now increased your risk of dementia, maybe similar to if you had some other chronic disease that was affecting nerves, diabetes, sleep apnea, something like that. You've put yourself into that position without knowing it. Your doctor may not have known it either. A lot of doctors
Well, and they're
don't.
just trying to help, right? So when they prescribe these medications, their intent is, well, maybe you're 1 in 8 that this is going to help. But at the same time, everybody's going to get the...
Exactly. So even if you're one of the people that it's helping, likely it's still hurting.
As far as the dementia stuff, yeah.
So then the other risk, which is all, I think maybe just as important, it increases your risk of dizziness, imbalance, and falls.
Which is one of the largest killers of people over the age of 65.
Hey,
right?
From what? Yeah.
A hip fracture, right?
Yeah, so it increases your risk of fractures by 300%. And that's one of the biggest killers. And so these medicines do these nasty things to your brain and to your whole body, causing all these side effects. And so for most people, they're just not the right approach.
Wow. And so, obviously, we talked about, the different ways of treating this. So I just want to, so PT with Kegels and everything, always good to try, not necessarily going to affect overactive bladder syndrome. Then there's medications, and it may or may not help. But there are some serious potential side effects that a lot of people don't want. And so, therefore... I think when we discuss the data on people that start on these meds, a lot of them go off these meds relatively quickly because they can't tolerate the side effects, right?
Exactly right.
And so for those people that either are suffering in silence and haven't tried these things, those may be options. For the people that have tried them and it didn't work, obviously what you're saying with a 90% success rate for this sacral neuromodulation, incredible procedure. So are there a lot of side effects with this procedure? I mean, with the spinal cord stim, we know that relatively safe procedure, pretty low. Is it the same with sacral neuromodulation?
Yeah, so that's like one of the beautiful things about this. Every medicine, every procedure, everything that's ever done has some potential risk.
Yep.
So we understand that. What's beautiful about this is there's been 200,000 people who have done this, who've used this therapy around the world. So it's not that this just came out, last year. I did say that the company that we use, just came out 4 or 5 years ago. And so their technology is way better than what's been out for the last 25 years. Having said that, we know the risk really well. And so this procedure is called PNE, peripheral nerve. And so we're treating a peripheral nerve. So this one is a little different than spinal cord stimulation. And then, another, I guess, version of this would be like brain stimulation. Brain stimulation, maybe you would think of as the most invasive. Like you have to open up the brain or the skull and place a little lead. Spinal cord stimulation is minimally invasive, but you place it in the epidural space.
So along the spine.
Yeah, this may be even less invasive because it's on a peripheral nerve, so it's not in the spinal canal. And so as far as risk are concerned, we don't run the risk of, potentially, you always run the risk of nerve damage. Over the 200,000 people that have done this, no one's ever had nerve damage reported.
Oh, well, that's great.
That's crazy. Like that, you can't say that about many things. The biggest single risk that we know about, 1% chance of infection on the surgery.
Any surgery, we're going to have a chance of infection.
Yeah, so we do have people on antibiotics for a few days, but you're right. Yep.
Yeah. Well, we talked about, so we had Dr. Mirzadeh on the show a few weeks ago, and he talked about that as a functional neurosurgeon, about the deep brain stimulation.
Yes.
He also is a big fan of neuromodulation and said that he speculated that in the future, neuromodulation may be able to help with a lot of things that right now we're using medications on, such as even treating diabetes and controlling insulin and blood sugar and stuff like that, which was fascinating to listen to. But it sounds like the sacral neuromodulation is another one of those avenues. We're using it pretty heavily, neuromodulation in general, for pain, but using it for those other conditions, sounds like this has been an incredible space. So now that you've been in it, you've been doing this for a few years now, right?
A couple of years where I'm like basically
only doing
focusing on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, like what's your favorite, or just some of your favorite patient stories as far as the impact that it's had on those patients?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because this is, and even in the pain world, but this is one of the things that's so rewarding. And, it's, for a lot of people, it's like a light switch. So there's 2 steps to this. The first step is they try it out. And so there's this 3-day trial. 2 little wires are placed through small needles just above the tailbone area, placed next to the little nerves. Needles come out. We tape these little wires to the back. So then we see all these stories where it's like, how was your trial? And we're talking to them every single day during the trial. But it's crazy. So they might be like, I was waking up 6 times a night, which, if I wake up once a night, like I'm like all upset the next day, like,
terrible night's sleep.
Yeah, 6 times a night. So they're like, I woke up once last night, and this is the first time that's happened in 8 years.
Wow.
And they're like, I haven't slept this good. And, they just have like a calmness on their face. So I think just, we see that, I would say, like on a weekly basis where someone's like, this, was remarkable. We see a lot of people once to the second stage. Let's say they try it and they do well. You have to get at least 50% relief to go on to the next phase. The average person gets about 75% improvement.
So you're not even going to do the procedure unless they get at least 50% relief?
Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So they have to get, and then generally they'll get about 75%. So we get our 100%, and then we, get some 50%. And then some people it just doesn't work for them. But 90%, it does make a big difference. There's one guy that I like, and so he had the permanent procedure. But I really liked his story. He was, a younger guy. That's all relative. So he was like, 50. So he's a younger guy, and he worked at a TV station. And actually, we had filmed a segment with one of our other patients who was telling her story. And this guy was part of the team who was editing that. And that's how he learned about this therapy. And he's like, I need to try and see Dr. Mcjunkin. So he came in, super nice guy. And so he worked at the TV station here in Phoenix. And so one of the jobs he had, which was, I thought was pretty cool, is he was editing, I think, live sports. So I can't remember if it was the Suns or Arizona Diamondbacks or something like that. But basically, they never know when a commercial is going to come in.
Oh, yeah. So
they might just call like timeout, and all of a sudden he has to splice in a commercial. And so he has to always be ready. But he's like, my life's been terrible. Like, this is what I do. But I have to go to the bathroom like every hour. And I have this strong desire, and I've had it since I was a kid.
Wow.
He's like, I was like born like this, and my brothers made fun of me, and so on and so forth. So anyways, he's like, I didn't know there was anything like this. So it was really fun because he tried it, and then he did amazing. And then he just said it's like totally changed his life. So he's still working, but he was wondering, like, am I going to have to shift to some different role, maybe make less money, be in a different position because I just can't do my job. And so I thought that was a fun story, just because he was still, it just made him so much more effective in his job, where he could pay attention to what's happening instead of just focusing on what's happening here. I would say other stories we hear very commonly are generally with this condition, you nailed it, like people put their life on hold. And oftentimes their social life is something that suffers. They don't go, see their kids or their sister. So
car rides are probably a nightmare.
So they're scared of car rides. A common one I hear is like, I know every bathroom between here and Flagstaff or something like that, just in case. And if the rest stop is closed, like, I'm screwed. So they like have it down. But another common one is like, hey, my husband and I went on our dream trip to Europe, or we went on a cruise. And so they said, like, I did travel for a while before this, but I literally have to bring a whole suitcase full of like diapers and pull-ups, and it was just like embarrassing. And then a long plane ride to Europe, like you're getting up and down, and like I had one lady she was a travel agent, and she's like, I just had to stop working because I can't travel with all these people.
So that's the impact you're talking about of like this, like when people have this, it can be super impactful.
So
but yet at a 90% chance of it being better, it sounds like most people should, like if they're suffering from that, it's like worth giving it a try.
And that's what's unique about this space, I would say, is there's just nothing in this arena that even compares.
How many people did you say again suffer from this?
So in America, we think there's somewhere between 30 and 50 million people.
Wow. So I mean, this is a huge population.
It's a massive.
And then you mentioned, I want to just touch on this. You mentioned that it's also for bowel incontinence.
Yes.
So not just bladder.
Yep.
It's the same area, same procedure, everything like that.
Yep. So it's the exact same procedure, and this works on what are called the sacral nerves. So we call it sacral neuromodulation. But basically, the way I think of it is you have this highway, and so I always use the example of like the 101, and it's like you're driving on the 101 and there's a car accident. That just a little bit of electrical energy is maybe like an ambulance that just clears off the road. Now all of a sudden your signals can get up and down. So it works for both the bladder and the bowel because they travel on these same nerves.
Well, I mean, so the sacrum's the bottom of the spine, so it's right where your glutes are. And as those nerves come out, they actually control the bowel and the bladder. So you're saying if we can normalize that nerve signal, then we're going to see more normal activity from those organs to which they go to, which is going to be the bowel and the bladder.
Exactly right. Yep, that's right.
So, talked about some patient experiences, talked about why you've really dedicated a lot of time now, and really your whole career has shifted to where you're treating this because of the impact that you feel like you're having on people's lives. I want to shift gears for just a moment. Obviously the show's called Doctors Unscripted, and your background as an interventional pain doctor, as well as what you're doing now, I think really fall in line with what our mission is, which is in big part we want to make sure that we're talking about treating the root cause of conditions, right? And getting away from just writing scripts for everything. I feel like unfortunately medicine has become very scripted, right? And essentially what we're seeing is you come in with this condition, what drug treats that, what drug treats that, what drug treats that, right? And to me, it's like you're driving on the road and your check engine light comes on. And what modern medicine has become frequently, not all the time, there's great doctors out there, but it's taking a permanent marker and just scribbling over the check engine light and being like, we fixed it. When in reality, you have never addressed the root cause, you've just addressed the symptoms.
Exactly.
And so one of the things I love about what you're talking about is that through this procedure, it's decreasing reliance on medicines that only treat kind of symptoms, and then two, really by doing that, you're helping a bunch of people that maybe are treating with that medication but can't tolerate the side effects and are looking for alternative options. And so helping them to get to a more permanent solution for this is incredible.
Absolutely.
With that being said, we ask people frequently on the show about the opioid epidemic, and you brought that up, so I just want to ask, in your opinion, what is one of the best ways that we as a medical community can treat the opioid epidemic?
Ooh, that's a really good, that's a great question. As a medical community, I mean, I think the interesting thing is I think it goes way beyond the medical community. And so, I think, it moves quickly into politics. So I do think like closing the borders down actually would make a really big difference, because I think now
illegal opioid usage.
Yeah, so in the past, the opioid epidemic, there's some, really good things. You probably know a lot about this, but like the Purdue,
Yep.
The
Hulu show on that,
the Sackler family who, kind of launched that. And so what they initially said, was opioids, and they had specifically, OxyContin. But opioids are safe and
non-addictive.
And there's no ceiling dose. They're safe at every single dose. And that's basically, they had some research that they were, was likely kind of paid research, which is not uncommon, I would say, kind of in the medical world. Paid research to support that opinion, and then they had a lot of money to invest in, educating / brainwashing
providers.
Medical doctors. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the problems in medicine is oftentimes we're so busy that we don't think.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, we have these trained people, and you could say the same thing about in Washington, like there's politicians and then there's lobbyists who come in and tell them what to do.
It's surface level versus deep thinking. Oftentimes you don't have time to do deep thinking.
Yeah, right? So I think that's one of the problems, like what you were talking about, the root cause. Mm-hmm. I would say like most doctors are just so busy, like I'm a surgeon, I just cut out the cancer, but they're not thinking about like where's the cancer coming from. Does the person's environment, is it, toxins in the water, in the air, and food? Mm-hmm. So I think the opioid epidemic initially was this thing where it was prescribed medications.
Yep.
And then I think it kind of changed along the way. And so I think, doctors actually responded once it came out, hey, these are highly addictive and people are dying from these. So that might be like the gateway where people are, we talked about marijuana as the gateway drug back in the day. But I think, the modern gateway drug is these prescription medicines. So I think doctors really have, I would say for the most part, they've reduced the number of medicines, and they're much more conservative about writing this, because we know that they are addictive and they do have a ton of side effects and they kill people.
Yep.
But I think the nasty ones, the ones that are really killing people are the fentanyl that are coming across the border. And that's been more of a modern, maybe in the last 10 years. So I think part of it is you have to have policy changes. I think there's some community issues. I think family issues. It's not the medical. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I think it's a great question, and we obviously talk about it a lot. I believe that if you want to solve the opioid epidemic, you need to decrease the fragmentation in our healthcare system. Right, I believe that, and so many people have experienced this, right? You go to your primary care and you're in back pain. And you go there and you say, I'm in back pain. And they say, well, you know what? I'm going to send you to a pain doctor, but let me write you a script since you're struggling right now.
Yeah.
And they put you on an opioid.
Yeah.
And then maybe it takes a couple weeks to get into the specialist for pain.
Yep.
And you come in and you're already on an opioid. So they say, okay, well, now we have to manage that opioid.
Yeah.
Right? Yep. And so because of this lack of communication from your primary to your specialist, to your surgeon, to your physical therapist, to your chiropractor, like your whole healthcare team, because they never talk to each other, there's this whole uncoordinated, everybody's trying to do the best within their bucket that they can with you. But when you can actually break those walls down and you can say, hey, let's all talk and say, instead of, this med and this med, like if we could do some physical therapy and chiropractic and treat that there first and see, okay, now we can modify their dosage on their medications. And hey, guess what? This procedure would be really helpful for treating the root cause. And now that we've done that, we can dramatically decrease their, prescription dosage and stuff like that, and then we can do PT to get them the rest of the way. And again, I believe that when providers come together and providers talk, the patient's the one that benefits. And so, to me, that's one of the biggest things that's our mission, at Pain Doctor and at Arizona Pain, is really to be able to say, how do we decrease this fragmentation that we have? How do we bring providers from different specialties together and get them to talk? I believe that same fragmentation is also affecting what you do in the bladder world.
Absolutely.
Right, and the fact that, as you said, because these primary care doctors are working so hard to treat, they've got diabetic patients, and they got cardiovascular patients, they got, all these different things, they don't have time to keep up on every single specialty and new procedure that's out there.
Yeah.
So they're doing their best to tread water and to be able to say, hey, let's do what we can to take care of you right now.
Right.
A lot of them probably don't even know that sacral neuromodulation is about, I'm guessing here, when you talk to patients, how many times have patients said, how come no other doctors talk to me about this before?
Every day. Yeah, we hear that every day. Absolutely.
So my at least hypothesis is that's partially due to fragmentation. So I think anytime you're going to fix an issue, part of it is increasing communication between really well-intentioned providers.
Yeah.
And when those providers can collaborate, you're going to see better medicine. And so that's part of the answer.
So I definitely think that's true. I want to push back just a little bit.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Now I'm interviewing you. But so I think in the last, I would say 5 to 10 years, primary care doctors are maybe less apt to write like a narcotic medicine.
Is true. Yep. I did that for more illustrative purposes.
But I think so there, because now there's like, it's pretty highly regulated, especially chronic. Who can write chronic narcotics is very highly regulated. I think one of the big things that we see, I think, is just the training of doctors. Medical doctors is different than chiropractors, is different than naturopathic doctors. And at least in my mind, I feel like there needs to be more of an addressing the root cause. Like you mentioned, like what's the underlying root cause? Why are you getting, herniated disc or arthritis?
Who do you feel like does treating the root cause better then?
Well, I think there's no question, yeah.
Who?
Well, I'd say medical doctors generally are terrible at treating the root cause. So you
believe chiropractors do a better job at focusing on the root cause than medical doctors from education?
100%. Yeah, I mean, there's not even a question. So unfortunately, and I don't think it was always like this.
Yeah,
so it wasn't always like that. And, so I think even, naturopathic doctor, if you go see a naturopathic doctor, they're like, I have acne. Okay, let's look at your gut health and see what you're eating.
Yeah.
You would never hear that from a medical doctor. A medical doctor's like, oh, okay, let's put you on this pill. So, like, unfortunately, medical doctors, and I'm in this arena, but, we do medicines that we prescribe, pharmaceutical companies. We do surgeries, for some advanced things, radiation, chemotherapy, all this kind of stuff. But really, we're not masters of your diet, the food you intake. And I think it's taken a huge toll on Americans. And it's a really long
I actually
train.
believe that America in general is waking up to what you just said.
For sure.
And I believe that there's a lot of wonderful doctors that are also waking up to what you just said. I feel like there's so many doctors that realize that nutrition is massively important to health, and that's been undervalued by the medical community for a while.
Absolutely.
And as we do better as a healthcare community of doing what you said, so one is, looking at healthcare differently, which is how do we treat the root cause? How do we make sure that we're educating and communicating with other providers? How are we educating our community? And then getting away from this practice of this quick fix, easy solution. Like, I do believe that there is a feeling of sometimes where a patient will come in and like, I need a solution now, to where it can put pressure on the doctors to say, well, I need to give them something now, so I'm going to write a script. And that's not always the case, but I do believe that can happen.
Yeah.
And so as we educate our communities of, while medicines are incredible miracles that we have oftentimes, they're not the long-term solution frequently. The long-term solution is going to be diet, it's going to be exercise, it's going to be circumstantial, changing the stresses that you're under. And when we do those things, oftentimes for the long term, those are going to have much better long-term benefits and less side effects than trying to go for the easier solution, which may be, here's a script for XYZ medication.
100% agree. Yeah, 100%. No, and I think we, part of it's a medical doctor's training. So like we have just the smallest course you could imagine on nutrition. And, it's just like you got to take this and pass the test to move on to the next thing. And then, part of it's the funding of, medical doctors and their schooling, I think is really regulated by, big pharmaceutical companies. And like, the opioid epidemic is like a classic example. There's another one called Vioxx. I don't know if you know much about that.
I don't know that one.
So Vioxx is a COX-2 inhibitor, kind of like Celebrex. And so it was really, really popular. It was highly marketed. I think Merck had the product. And there was some evidence that it increased the risk of heart disease and heart attacks. compared to like maybe if someone took like, let's say, an aspirin.
Yeah.
But it was heavily marketed, and it was marketed as safer, especially for bleeding in your gut, than like an aspirin. But it looks like in retrospect that about 100,000 people died from that medicine, and Merck was fined, and they knew about it. So it's kind of like the Sackler family. They knew about it, covered it up, and then they were fined kind of like billions of dollars and lost in court, like that this actually happened. Yeah. So anyway, there's like classic examples of like, I would say those things. That's not like, someone's not going to get addicted to something like that.
But they can have other health risks.
Yeah. And like, like you said, well, if they got out in the sunshine and, got their feet in the soil and like ate clean, food and breathed clean air, like that's actually like more healing for us.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think we've kind of gone astray. And I agree with you, like we want fast solutions right now, McDonald's, we want to eat in the next 2 minutes and that's it. But yeah, so I think society is waking up.
I mean, I hope so, because, the cost of healthcare has obviously skyrocketed. And in part of it is because of the management of so many chronic conditions.
Yeah.
But I also think one of the things that I'm hopeful for is that as people take their healthcare more seriously, and we are seeing that. People are starting to get more into, cold cleansing is, obviously been this cool thing that's been all over social media. But people are starting to say, you know what, like, anti-aging medicine is really becoming a lot more popular. People are saying, hey, I want to live healthy longer.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not just about living longer, it's about living healthy longer.
Absolutely.
And I think that really goes back to like Bladder Centers of America as well, which is if you want to have a quality of life as you age, sleeping through the night helps with that.
Yes.
Being able to go on vacation with your loved one helps with that.
Yep.
And not having to have a suitcase full of, diapers or something like that.
Yep.
I think that people are saying, I want that, and that's why you're seeing, you've been on multiple TV shows, you've been all over because of the patients you're helping with this, and I think that's really great, but I think it applies, like we've just been talking about, it applies to the pain space, it applies to the cardiovascular space, like all these different diabetic space, that as we desire to live longer, but live healthier longer, it's driving us to research ways to be able to support that.
Yes.
And for the longest time, and it's still the case, unfortunately, a lot of research is funded by pharma because research is very expensive, and we have a very high bar for what can come into the market through whether it's the FDA or different regulatory bodies. The people that have enough money to do that are frequently the ones that come from pharma. And so, it's no wonder that we also see a lot of medications coming out, and we see all these medications coming out, is because that's where the money's going into research. And if we could put the same amount of money into studying nutrition and studying lifestyle changes and studying surgeries and procedures like neuromodulation, like what type of future could we have? So that brings me to my next question here. So in the healthcare space, I know you do a lot of research, you study a lot of the new things that are coming out, which is why you're at the leading edge of sacral neuromodulation. What do you believe is, like, if we could fast forward 10, 20 years, 30 years, how do you think healthcare is going to change over that time period?
That's a wonderful question too. So, I think a lot of it is what you just described really well. I was kind of thinking about this analogy today, but I was thinking about, like a fish. Like we're kind of like fish swimming in almost like, sewer waters. And then if we get different diseases, we're like, wonder why we got cancer. I wonder why I got this bladder issue. Wonder why I have pain. And so I think really, and a lot of it is we're like, oh, it's my genetics. That's been a really popular thing. I just must have bad genetics from my parents, and that's why I got, this bladder issue or cancer or chronic pain or, diabetes or whatever it is. Certainly genetics play a part, but then there's this thing called epigenetics. And that's that, our environment plays a massive role on how our genetics actually interact with us in real life. And
nature versus nurture.
So exactly, it's nature versus nurture, and I think we've heavily focused on nature. Like this is the genetics, and there's nothing we can do except give you this medicine or this pill. And unfortunately, this pill has this other side effect, and you're going to have to take this pill for that side effect, and then it will cause that. It's just like this domino effect. So I think, and because that model is so expensive, I think we're going to start looking at root causes, and then we're going to try and figure out, oh, maybe it's, the reason this fish is sick or we're sick is because we're swimming in the sewer, and we need to actually get into clean water, and then our genetics will be fine. Like the genetics I was given will be actually fine in clean water. So I think it will be, I think the food supply that we have is compromised. And so, you've probably heard the transition. Have you heard the transition between the tobacco companies?
Yeah.
But I mean, that's crazy.
So again, it's the tobacco companies buying up all of the food companies back in the, I think it was 70s, 80s. And that was like the large, from a private equity investment point of view, all of the mergers and acquisitions was tobacco had all this cash.
Yeah.
And so they started to buy up food companies and took all of their scientists and researchers and said, how can we sell more food?
Yeah.
And they found ways to make food more addictive, crave it, better taste. And all of this research went on to where they could sell more product. And in that change, you do a lot of chemical changes to the food. And so that's what you're talking about. I know that's been on the news a lot recently. And so just recapping that story.
For totally people. True. So I think, that's part of the environment we're swimming in is the food, because it's really hard. And you got to be rich, and you have to have plenty of time to get like all organic food. And I just don't think it should be that way. It shouldn't be so hard for like a normal person to be healthy.
To eat healthy.
Because we're paying for all sorts of other things, but not for us to have like a healthy environment for our kids. Like it's pretty terrible.
I saw an interesting statistic, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it because I'm not going to get it exactly. But it said something about Europe having some of the most expensive food compared to the U.S. And yet their healthcare is a fraction of what we do. And like the person that was talking about this is like, I think there's a correlation there.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, like having more, like not being able to mass produce the food that we have with genetically modified food, maybe there is less nutrition, or maybe there is, like whether it's the different herbicides or insecticides or different things that they're spraying so that we can feed a lot of people, can have potentially other consequences to your nutrition. And so your point of us swimming in a river of, you could say we're bathed in different chemicals, whether it's from our food, from our air, from our medicines, from all these different things. And then we wonder why these different chronic conditions are so much more prevalent than they've ever been. Well, the amount of toxins and chemicals we're exposed to are higher than we've ever been exposed to, most likely. That's a good hypothesis.
There's also stories about Americans traveling to Europe, and they like eat, let's say go to Italy. They eat pizza and the pasta and so on and so forth, and they lose weight. And they're like, what's going on? And then there's I think there's a book about these twins, and one lives in Europe and one lives in America. And like Europe has very highly regulated foods. And America is like, I think, one of the least regulated kind of first world nations that there is. And so we have...
As far as what's available for us to eat.
And so it's not regulated at all. So we have pesticides, everything that gets in the food gets in us and can't get out of us. So like seed oils, have you done any research on that?
So
that's pretty interesting. So like seed oils are like canola oil, and there was the big push in the 50s to move from butter because it was so unhealthy. Even though like
our understanding of cholesterol, saturated fat versus unsaturated fat.
So there's been a lot of lies that like society has been built on top of, and I would say false research or paid for research. Sugar is good for you, cholesterol, myth, just like all these things. But seed oils are kind of interesting. So canola oil, they were machine oils. And basically, once they get in your body, and they're in every processed food, once they get in your body, they don't come out of your body for 2 years. So it's like, that's insane. Like
your body just can't process it.
So like butter, if that gets in your body, it comes out. Like, it's not sticking around there. Your body can process it. Like God made you to eat animal-based products, plants, but it's those pesticides and other things that we're not designed to, break up in our bodies.
Do you feel like, whether it's the cocktails of chemicals or any of that, do you feel like that has a direct impact on the huge increase that we're seeing in bowel and bladder issues as well, and neurological issues associated with those? So
it's interesting. So, one of my theories is that, I don't know if you've heard the like mitochondrial theory of health. Have you heard that? You've probably heard bits of it.
Probably have.
So mitochondria, mitochondria is like your energy producers, right? So they're in every cell in your body. Like your heart has a ton of mitochondria because it has to create a lot of energy to beat. And so mitochondria, are really important. And as those start to break down, which is called oxidative stress, then you're less able to heal yourself. So basically what we know about, generally it's almost every disease. So, what even aging, we're calling that like inflammaging now. Inflammation and aging, that's what's happening in the cellular level. But absolutely, so what's interesting about the bladder stuff is there's oxidative stress that's causing all these kinds of problems at the level of the bladder, at the level of the nerves. So, a good example would be like diabetes. So diabetes,
very prevalent condition.
High blood sugar and then insulin itself actually damages nerves. And so what I'm treating is a nerve damage condition. And so we see it more prevalently in diabetes. People have neuropathy, even people who have pain are kind of predisposed to this, I would say. But yeah, it's oxidative stress. So one of the things I try and focus on is a few different supplements that are good for people. And so there's been a few ones that are studied for at least this condition, vitamin D. And so I think there's becoming more and more compelling research that if your vitamin D levels aren't normal to high normal, your body can't heal itself of any condition. So all of us should probably be supplementing with that or getting in the sun, or probably both. And I think that in the sun's actually better than supplementing. Magnesium, vitamin C, and then there's research on melatonin. So for the bladder world, those are things. And vitamin C is an antioxidant, so it works directly on those mitochondria. Melatonin, actually, the highest concentration of melatonin in the body is in mitochondria, and that's how they actually decrease oxidative stress. So
very interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Well, and to your point, like, we have this breakdown, but the body knows how to heal itself, right? So with the proper building blocks of nutrition, your body should be able to heal. But when you're not getting the proper nutrients, it's really hard for the body to heal, and that's where we get into chronic inflammation, and we get aging, and we get accelerated aging processes like degenerative disc disease and joint disease. And so that makes perfect sense that you'd say if we had proper nutrition and supplementation, our body would be able to better heal itself, and it better heals itself, a lot of these chronic conditions go down dramatically. And so, 100% agree with that, and think that, to your point on vitamin D, that's the one vitamin of all vitamins that our body can make itself, right? But at the same time, while it's probably better if we get it from the sun, we went from, living outside a lot to not living outside near as much. And so to even get the amount of vitamin D we need from the sun, I don't know how much time it is. I'm sure there's great research on that. But I think that a lot of people, they work jobs inside or they live inside and they don't go out that often. And for those people that can't get outside as much, very important that vitamin D is essential for almost every process in the body. And so 100% agree that understanding the nutritional needs of your body is one of the ways to increase healthcare. It's one of the ways to increase your health, to decrease cost of healthcare.
Absolutely,
Living healthier is going to make it to where you need less, and if you need less, the costs come down. So that's a good point. Yeah,
I think for me, at least during COVID, that was one thing I was kind of sad about, and I think there's, we learned a lot of lessons, hopefully, from COVID. But one of them is pretty early on, we had research that vitamin D could really help people's immune system and prevent them from having really nasty side effects. And I was personally, I was shocked that no health agencies, no governmental agencies, no states, no one recommended it.
Instead it would stay inside, right?
Yeah, it's just the simplest thing ever is hey, maybe just supplement with a couple of things and it might reduce your risk of this problem by, more than 50%. That seems like a no-brainer instead of mandating certain things. It should have been we have this freely available because it's cheap and the sun is available too. Get outside.
Well, to your point on that though is one of the core issues in healthcare that makes it so expensive is we oftentimes don't start treating until after the condition's there. Right? If we focus on how do we avoid the condition, whether it's good nutrition, whether it's vitamins, whether it's these different things, that's where things become cheaper. If you're treating something that's late stage versus treating something that is early stage, it's obviously cheaper to treat early stage than late stage. It's easier to treat early stage than late stage. It's better outcomes early stage versus late stage. Whether that's cancer, cardiovascular, name the condition, it's easier and less expensive early stage than late stage. Yet because of that, there's not as much money or funding or research that goes into treating early stage because there's not as much money in it. But I do believe that as our healthcare community moves towards what's causing this, treat the root cause, we will see a dramatic increase in healthcare. And as it pertains to Bladder Centers of America, sacral neuromodulation, I believe it's an incredible procedure for treating people that have the condition, but it sounds like you're already doing research into what's the right nutrition and supplementation to help your patients so that they don't necessarily need that or can maintain good health afterwards. Right?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So, I will talk to some people and they'll be like, this just started up a couple weeks ago, my symptoms. And I'm like, okay, here's what you need to do. Let's try and work on changing your diets. And so what what I think we're working on is this person has inflammation of the nerves.
Yep.
And we know you can get it from all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
You can get it from a viral infection, from a bacterial infection. And then there's the chronic degenerative kind that develops over probably years and years and years. So in the very early stages, it's like diet, lifestyle changes, supplements, and let's talk to you in a month or two and see if things are better. And, so I don't talk to that many people because most people aren't searching until it's bad.
Yeah.
But the people that I have talked to are pretty interesting because I feel like we've turned around a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's certainly, I think, and then even the people long-term, like, there's no procedure, including the one that I do, that just fixes
everything.
Yeah, so I think most diseases, could be called like metabolic diseases.
I can understand that.
And
why
so,
you'd say that.
Yeah, so it's all the stuff that we've been talking about is you would classify as maybe like a metabolic condition, and so this little device that uses electrical energy opens up the highway of information, but it doesn't prevent further damage.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are some lifestyle modifications and things that everyone should be doing long term, and that's, I think, honestly, as a physician, like you mentioned, it's harder to implement some of those things long term, but I think there's a lot of benefit in those things.
So let's say this, for people that maybe, they listen to this interview and they say, I've had some bowel or bladder issues and stuff like that. What do you feel like is kind of some of the core steps they should be taking to either take care of like early stage versus coming in and seeing you? Should anybody that's having those conditions see you? Like, what's the best kind of step-by-step process of looking at this condition? Yeah,
it's funny. So, I've been thinking about, this exact idea. And so I think generally I would say everyone should do, it'd be a even longer discussion than this on like all the different things they should do. But, I break it down to 4 things: in, out, move, and rest.
Okay.
And so in is what they should be putting in their body.
Mm-hmm.
And so generally, we all need to clean up what we're putting in our diet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then I'm a believer in that high sugar, high fructose corn syrup, any GMOs, all those things are damaging.
They cause inflammation, so therefore,
They cause inflammation for pain, and for any other condition, they're absolutely dangerous. So I'm a believer in like a ketogenic style of diet. Doesn't have to be perfect.
Even if it's just decreasing sugar, it's going to help.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and all forms of sugar, whether it's high fructose or sucrose or whatever.
Yeah. So fruit, unfortunately, has sugar in it.
Sugar.
So I think you have to limit that. And then I would say, if you're eating vegetables, fruits, organic, and then I think certain kinds of meat are better. So I think diet is one, like what you're putting in your body. I think all of us need light. So I think that's actually, the circadian rhythm actually applies, and it's really screwed up in our society. But it really, just because we work indoors, you mentioned all this, we stay up at night, we stay on our iPads, on our phones, we watch TV, whatever. A lot of diseases actually relate to circadian rhythm. So, adjusting your lights inside to what they are outside, sleeping. So that sleeping falls under the rest. But what you put in your body, what you get out. So we all need to detoxify. So you mentioned cold plunge, like sauna is probably the best known detox that we have. And a lot of diseases relate to toxicities building up in our body. Even losing fat, or fat stores toxicities in our body. If we lose fat, it helps with that. Moving. Every day we need to get out and move to some degree. So it doesn't have to be running a marathon, but the more you can get out, just walk around the block, that's actually extremely healthy.
Absolutely.
And then rest. And so this is the problem I see with a lot of the bladder people, is if you're waking up more than once a night, you never really enter into deep sleep. And deep sleep is where your brain cleans itself out, your body detoxifies, and then your body can heal itself. So a lot of these people are in chronic stress state all the time.
Yeah.
So even if they get on a great diet, even if they get out and exercise, things might improve. Yeah, so even with the right nutrition, like we said, that's so important, but they're still in this chronic state of stress.
Yep.
Like they're never going to turn the corner. So that's one of the things I think on this is like, one of the amazing things is it allows them, their body to heal and rest.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
No,
but
that's perfect. I think for anybody that is kind of wondering where to start, I think you nailed all the steps that they should be looking at. And then ultimately as well, coming in to see you obviously is a great way to, get your advice for their individual situation.
That's right.
Like that. We've had a great opportunity to work and refer patients back and forth. One of the reasons why we frequently work together is actually on some of that neuromodulation discussion, and we're huge fans of the neuromodulation space. And knowing that you're doing such amazing things for patients and improving the quality of life, helping patients to really treat that root cause, and then not just saying, okay, we fixed your condition, but also saying, okay, let's do nutrition, let's get you moving, let's do those things. I mean, that's one of the things that we love about the relationship with you guys over at Bladder Centers of America.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, I think, I could say the exact same things about you. And the fact that you do focus on the root cause, like I think we both share that. 100%. That's a similar, ideology where we think that's the way to help people. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, last question I have for you. Okay.
All right.
So, if you were not able to be a medical doctor, what would you be?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let's see. I'm kind of a nerd. I
couldn't tell that.
I know. Yeah. Like, how would you ever know? I really like research. So I really like learning and growing and just like learning how things work and trying to figure out how to help people. So I'd probably be in a space helping people and, something that, maybe was cutting edge and that involved research and those kinds of things. So I don't know if it would be a business, running a business, or what exactly it would be, but it would be something in that arena.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Tory. What a great discussion. Really hope anybody that listened learned something. I believe
Justin.
that you covered some amazing things. Dr. Tory Mcjunkin with Bladder Centers of America. We love working with you. Thanks so much for coming on, and look forward to doing more together.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great.